Good afternoon, Codger Biker here, and yes, though we may have a little sunshine, it's winter and it's bloody freezing here, so the problem of how to mothball an MZ TS125. Okay, so what's this video about? Well, this is my 1984 MZ TS125, which I had back in the 80s and had returned to me by my friend Sean. You may have seen the video series. If not, I'll put a card up here. So the problem is that it took me a long time to recover this bike from its years in a pig shed, and although it's in a garage, it's very cold in here, and we've had snow recently, and I noticed some condensation forming on the bike, and basically I'd like to prevent it from rusting away again. So the first thing I'm going to do is disconnect the 6-volt battery and put it on a trickle charge. So let's do that first. Yeah, basically I'm just interested in preventing any deterioration. Now the bike is in very good condition. It's passed its MOT last year and is roadworthy. So first up, the battery. I don't know if this is the original screw on this bike, but I always remember it being there, and I could easily replace it with a nut, but I remember undoing this 39 years ago. Sentiment. Don't forget your rubber grommet here, slides out. So I've disconnected the battery terminals. I'm placing them here, and I do have a 6-volt battery charger, so I can access the terminals, positive and negative, as and when, just to maintain the battery. Disconnected it so it doesn't discharge through the coil or whatever. I'm not quite sure how this bike switches on and off. So that's the electrical system disconnected. How easy was that? That's a new coil I put on in last year. There's your fuses. Right, next up, draining the coolant. Doesn't have any, don't have to bother with that. So with no coolant to draw out, there is gear oil in the gearbox. I think I'm just going to leave that in there because I will be starting this bike after the winter, no doubt, so I'll leave that in there for now. I need to drain that. Next job. Yeah, this bike had seized after being left outside for a year. It's actually fine now, it's got a lot of compression. But I'm going to remove the spark plug and drop a bit of two-stroke oil in there just to keep it lubricated, and I'll kick it over once a week, a couple of times, just to keep everything moving. Of course, you've got to be careful that you don't hydraulically, what's the word for it? Put too much oil in it and end up with hydraulic resistance, so the piston can't go to the top. So just put a couple of drops in. That's, well, I'm not advising you to do it, that's what I'm going to do, as if you're likely to have one of these anyway. Anybody remember these? If you're of my age, you might remember having one of those. I had one of these back then. I love these things. Again, it's just sentimentality really. Right, so shall remove the plug. Best not to leave the plug out, as moisture could get in there, which is what I think might have happened before, because the plug wasn't very tight when I got the bike. Well, I was going to use two-stroke oil, but I can't get it in there, so I'm going to use a bit of 3-in-1. That'll do. Just about 3 or 4 drops, nothing too much. None of you saw that, but some's gone in. It's not much, but it's better than nothing. Put the plug back in, tighten it up a little bit, not too much, just enough to make it airtight, watertight anyway. There you go, nice and solid. I always give it a wobble. I remember I used to think they were tight in the back then, and sometimes you wobbled them, they just tightened upon a bit of dirt or something. You could feel it and then give it a bit more. That one's fine. Place the cap, and a little bit of 3-in-1 oil in there. It'd be funny if it dieseled and started up. Anyway, so that's probably totally unnecessary. Main point is really is to make sure that the spark plug's seated so that no moisture can get in. The next job is to wipe down the exhaust, which I've done with ACF 50, just to stop it getting any surface rust, even in the garage. And it seems fine, it's got none on it. So, battery isolated, exhaust, chrome, ACF 50'd, that'll all burn off if I ever start again, and a tiny bit of oil in the top of there. Put a bit of the old ACF 50 on all the chrome bits as well. I'll probably forget and think that's leaking in the spring. So ACF 50 on the chrome. You get the idea. Seems to work. I know a lot of people swear by it, other people say it's rubbish, but for this job it'll be fine. It's just sitting indoors in a cold, damp garage. So for my next job, once a month or so, got a switchable battery charger, 2V 6 and 12, some Chinese thing no doubt, polarity and charge light on it, so set it to 6V, and once a month probably charge the battery up. Okay, like every other YouTuber in the world, so the usual, take your negative off first, put your negative on last. I didn't take any notice of that, it's not even turned on yet. I can put the power on now. It's on green, which is not surprising because I have already charged this only a few days ago, so it's kept its charge. It's a good battery actually, that. So once a month I will charge the battery just to keep it topped up. I suppose I could leave that on, but it's in the way. No need to with this battery. It's good enough just to do it once a month. Look at the old fuses. And I bet some of those cobwebs are from the farm where I grew up. Look at that. Lincolnshire cobweb. Do you know, it's a really strange thing having something like this back in your life. Something that you owned all those years ago. Because that screw, for instance, and just the feel of these nuts, the way they go in, just takes me back to 1984, 1985. It's a strange feeling. Which is why I guess I need to keep hold of this bike. Like, to be honest, my number one concern with this bike is this tank. You can see a pattern of there, look of its age. That wasn't there when I had it. That's Sean's done that. If you ever watch this, Sean, that's your responsibility. But the tank itself was so damaged or dirty when I got it. I only just managed to save it. It's been fine, it's not leaked at all, but I really wouldn't want it to go back into the condition that it was in when I got it. Also, I've had to replace this tap twice till I found one that will actually work with new fuels, or appears to work with the new E5 fuels. I've not tried it with E10 yet. Previous two fell apart, and quite quickly as well, which would have been great if you're out in the middle of nowhere and all your fuel just comes out of your tank. So this tank holds quite a lot of fuel, 2.5 gallons, which is quite a lot for a little bike like this. So, you know, you get your good 200 miles before you had to refill it. So you don't want 2 gallons of fuel dumped on the road when the tap fails. So there's two things really. One is the new fuels. I don't want them damaging the tap or the carburetor for that matter. And the other one is I don't want this tank rusting again when I empty it. So for now my solution is, well, I'll show you. My other problem is this carburettor, which is working fine. It always leaks a little bit of fuel because there's a vent hole in it. So what will happen is, I suspect, if I've left the fuel on, it would eventually drain the entire tank just by evaporation. It'll take a long time. But no, I've disconnected it, as I said. So it's disconnected from fuel, which the fuel I made for it is, as best as I can tell, ethanol free. Had to make my own. So I've stored that jerry can there. So that's full, more or less, of two-stroke fuel. Okay, so the problem with this carburettor is that almost certainly going to need to be rebuilt before I can use the bike again. But what I've tried to do, just to try and forestall that, it's not a difficult job, but it's expensive, as I shall explain. To forestall it, I ran the bike until it ran out of fuel. Now there'll still be some in the bottom of there, no doubt, and that will evaporate and varnish, a sort of varnish appears which gums everything up, so the float is likely to stick when it comes to starting the bike again in the summer. And I wouldn't be surprised to see fuel pouring out of it before it releases. The problem with the carburetor is not difficult to undo. It's getting the gaskets and seals again. There's one in the top and there's one on the bowl, which you can get, but the kits, they tend to come from Germany, and the expense now, since the UK put itself behind a paywall, the expense is extortionate. So I would like to avoid having to redo that. So what I've done, as I say, is I've drained as much fuel out of it as I can by allowing the bike to run till it stopped. Disconnected the fuel pipe so no more fuel's going into it, and just have to, fingers crossed. So the second part of the problem is what to do with this fuel tank. So what I've decided to do is I've unbolted it and I've drained all the fuel out of it, and I've poured in just what I've got really. I happen to have quite a lot of two-stroke motorcycle oil, so I filled it partly up with that. Don't know how well you can see in there, but already after just a month or so of me not bothering with it, there is some rust beginning to form on the inside. Can you see that? So that will need to be cleaned out before the summer, but that's not too difficult. I could just brush that out. But if I left it and didn't do anything, I think I'd end up with the whole tank rusty again. So this is what I have done. If anyone's got a better suggestion, please let me know in the comments. But this is what I'm going to do for now. Basically, you've got to be proactive. So, as was quite common with small bikes of this era, the tank is held on by a couple of bolts through here on a rubber pad, and then there are two rubber bungs that are inside there the tank slides onto, and the fuel pipe would be your last resort should it all come undone. So I've taken the bolts out, and this is what I'm going to do with it. Just take it off. So you can see there's a couple of rubber bungs there just screwed into the frame, two more there upon which it sits, and that stops the tank from jarring and deadens the vibrations. The other thing I noticed was that the throttle cable used to be, if I had the bike ticking over, if I moved the handlebars, it used to change the revs on the engine. And that's because the accelerator cable came round underneath and down. I think it was getting trapped under the tank, and I don't think it should have been there. So quite how it got to be there, I don't know. So I've reinstated it, threaded it through here where it used to be and straight into the top. So hopefully that will cause that problem. I've also freed up the whole of that area, so because this wire was also there, which is I think the wire for the lights. You can see where it was actually getting cut into by the tank. So that has as a sort of side effect of me bothering to do this, I thought about that, and now I've got a much cleaner place for the tank to sit. So what have I done? I filled the tank up partially with 2-stroke oil, and once a week I shall rotate it about, mix the oil around the inside of the tank. It's got a tiny amount of fuel left in it. 1992, 1982, and you can see that it's oily on the cap, it's oily in the tank. Our routine shall be once a week, swirl that around, tip it upside down, get the oil well mixed in. When I've done that, place it back on the bike. And just leave it sitting on there. And I hope in that way it will prevent the tank ever rusting out again. So that's it basically, that's how I'm going to mothball my MZ. Once a week, give it a kick over, just to keep it moving with a bit of oil in it. Keep the plug tight, disconnect the fuel, leave the carb and hope. Unfortunately, the cost of the kit postage actually is extortionate, so I've got one left. I'm going to leave that as for safekeeping and try and make this one last by undoing it as little as possible. So hopefully we'll see next summer the carburetor will work without me having to clean it all out. One can but hope. As I said, I don't particularly want to leave any ethanol petrol in there eating it away. I can't take the float bowl off because that will weaken the gasket. So I just have to hope that as it evaporates, most of the fuel was used up anyway, but as it evaporates through the tiny hole, that it doesn't leave too much of that horrible varnish behind and that it still works. Right, I think that's everything. So, obviously check the tyre pressures every now and then. Check the bearings and check it's not seizing up. That works so well, that front wheel. Brake, free. So the wheels are free to move, so just check things like that, I suppose. Right, am I missing something? If so, please let me know. Here's to a great new year. Codger Biker is out. You're okay though, aren't you, Wolfgang? By the radiator. Enjoy the sunshine, Elliot the camel. May not last.